Assume that income Y in our economy increases. Show graphically the effect of money demand and interest rate. After that, run a dynamic analysis using a scheme of arrows. Here again, we would basically construct the money market equilibrium graphically. So we would have interest rate on our y-axis, stock of money on the x-axis. We would put our levels as usual. Our money supply in this case is a horizontal line indicated by MS, and at this point we have stock of money to be M0. In this regard, we have also a money demand, which is indicated by a red line here. So we have money demand. I would indicate it to be 0. At this point, we have an equilibrium point A, where a corresponding interest rate is applicable to be I is equal to IA. So what we are saying now is there is an increase in income. So there is an increase in income indicates that there is an increase in aggregate demand. Money demand is also part of our aggregate demand. So if there is an increase in income, the curve that is going to shift is going to be money demand, which is actually part of aggregate demand. In simple terms, if there is an increase in income, there is an increase in aggregate demand, and money demand is part of aggregate demand. If the entire aggregate demand is increasing, our money demand is also increasing. So because of the increase in income, we have a new money demand curve, which should be represented by MD1 as a new money demand curve. So at this point of increase, we have money demand at point B, where our money demand increased. So at this point, we have a higher money demand than the money supply because there is no equilibrium anymore. Money demand increased because we had an increase in income. This increase in income resulted in an increase of aggregate demand. Money demand is part of our aggregate demand, so money demand shifted to the right. If money demand shifts to the right, as you can see at our interest rate IA, money supply is actually lower than money demand. Money demand increased, money demand is greater than money supply. So if there is a high money demand, as we have said earlier, economic agents would try to do anything to secure money. So what they do is they would actually sell their bonds that they have on their hand in order to get money. So that is again to say the supply of bonds would increase. If supply of bonds increase, then supply of bonds would be greater than the demand for bonds. If there is a high supply of any product in economic theory, this would automatically relate to a lower price for that product. So in our case, if there is a high supply of bond in the bond market, the price would fall. The price of bond falling means there would be a high yield of bond, and the interest rate should be raised in order for the equilibrium equation to be reached. If interest rate is high in this regard, there would be a lesser demand for money because people would not tend to borrow money if interest rate is high. So this is again to say interest rate would first need to be raised to a point IC because this is actually aggravated by the fall in the bond price. If there is a fall in the bond price, there is an inverse relationship between bond price and interest rate, so interest rate would automatically rise, and we would have a point C equilibrium here, and in order to reach this point C equilibrium, we will have to have a decrease in money demand, but a decrease in money demand is actually also caused by a rise in interest rate, because nobody wants to borrow money if there is a high interest rate in the market. So this adjustment process, or this decrease of money demand, would continue until the point where we reach point C, or which is the money market equilibrium, where money demand is equal to money supply. So graphically, it is indicated on the slides that you are seeing, and the scheme of arrows as requested in the problem indicates the fact or the movement of each variables as we have just discussed. The next part is the increase in money supply. Now assume that money supply increases, show graphically the effect of the money supply curve and equilibrium interest rate. After that, run a dynamics analysis using a scheme of arrows. So for that, we would again come back to our money market equilibrium, where we draw the graphs of money demand and money supply. So we have again our stock of money, interest rate here, our money supply is vertical line as it was initially, so we have MO here. Our initial money supply is indicated to be MS0, and we have a money demand which is indicated to be MD. So at this point we have an equilibrium between money supply and money demand. So we have an equilibrium interest rate of IA. So what happens at this point is that we are saying money supply increased. So this is again to say there is an expansionary monetary policy where money supply is increasing. So the government, the central bank undertook an expansionary monetary policy where it shifted money supply from MS0 to MS1, and this is caused by the increase in money supply. So that is again to say we have a point B as a new point where money supply increased, and at this point B we have a new interest rate IB. So what happened here is that at this point we have a higher money supply because money supply increased. Initially we have said that money supply is equal to money demand, but if the central bank undertook an expansionary monetary policy at some point, then our equality would be not valid anymore. So money supply increased, there is a higher money in the market, so money supply increased in compared to money demand. So this is again to say our expansionary monetary policy implied that our money supply is greater than our money demand. So what would happen if money supply is greater than our money demand? There is actually an excess supply of money on the market. So if there is an excess supply of money on the market, people would tend to buy bonds because interest rates in this case are also low. As you can see, interest rate fall from IA to IB. So there is an excess demand for bond. That means the bond demand is greater than bond supply. If there is a high demand for a product in economic theory, we would have a higher price for that. So bond demand is greater than bond supply. That automatically indicates there would be a high bond price in that regard. If there is a high bond price, that would automatically indicate there will be a lower bond yield and a lower interest rate. So this is indicated by the move from IA to IB. So in order to become on the equilibrium, we have to have an increase in money demand because we have a lower interest rate from IA to IB. If there is a reduction in interest rate from IA to IB, people would tend to borrow more. So they would have seen, okay, there is a lower interest rate. Maybe it's better if I borrow money now. So there would be an increase in money demand. So the increase in money demand would be in this direction of your graph. So this increase in money demand, motivated by the reduction in interest rate, would go ahead until the point where we reach point B of our graph, which says money demand is equal to money supply, or again, it is the equilibrium on the money market. So here on the slide, it is the graphs that I have done is actually indicated, and the scheme of arrows that we have just discussed is written on the last part of this slide. This would be the equilibrium on the money market, problem 10 from session 3. If you have questions, please do feel free to let us know. Thank you for your attention.